Introduction to Revelation, Part 1. This is a book about the theology of power of evil men, dictators, and the power of God. In this video, I just want to talk about the message and purpose and interpretation of the book of Revelation. I'm going to do 3 more videos. It's the most difficult book of the New Testament, and most people don't really understand it. How will the world end? Will it be because of global warming? Will we just annihilate each other? Will we destroy the planet? Will there be a mighty end-time war? These are the questions people ask. What's going to happen in the future? Anyway, my name is Pastor Peter Hawkes. I'd like to welcome you to my channel, and going to give a brief introduction in this one, at any rate, as I said, about the message, the purpose, and the 4 different schools of interpretation of Revelation. First of all, Revelation was written by the Apostle John. Some people think in AD 95, others think he was written earlier, but anyway, it says he was on the island of Patmos, so it seems to indicate his time of exile, that it had a later date. The purpose of Revelation isn't immediately obvious to everyone, but it was written at a time of persecution that began under Nero in AD 64 and continued under Domitian AD 81 to 96, to a small, dispersed, powerless, persecuted church with living in a context of idolatry everywhere. There didn't seem to be any evidence of God's power. So John is writing, and this is really actually Jesus sending this letter to us. It's the revelation of what Jesus said to this highly persecuted group of Christians, where there's no evidence of God's power. The essential message of Revelation is that Jesus is coming back to take control of the earth, and it's to give hope to the church and to show God's triumph over evil. Essentially, it's saying he is Lord, he is victorious, and to encourage the Christians to overcome in the time of persecution with a prize of reward at the judgment. And so these are the themes to address the fact that God is going to judge this world. It also addresses the problems of the 7 churches, and not all of them have problems, but basically 7 conditions of these churches over which John had jurisdiction and care. Why is Revelation so difficult? You must have discovered that if you've opened it up, that after the first few chapters it becomes incredibly confusing and difficult. Well, the main reason is because it's called apocalyptic literature. It's the revealing of God from his point of view about what's going to happen in the end times, and it's written in language that's different from normal books like the newspaper or novels, because it's written in symbolism and pictures. Some are obvious, like the lake of fire is hell. Some are explained, like the stars and angels, and in a later video I'm going to go into more detail about that. Some are paralleled in the Old Testament, and that's really important for reading Revelation. We need to be really well versed understanding the books of Ezekiel and Zechariah and Daniel, and also the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 onwards. If we don't read those, we're going to have great difficulty in understanding Revelation. So where things are confirmed and where things are explained in other passages really helps us. So in some things, for example, are paralleled in the Old Testament. For example, wild beasts are tyrannical regimes. Some symbols are obscure, like the white stone. We don't really understand that, but it's written in code in the book of Revelation, because the Christians were under Roman persecution, so they couldn't say things too obviously. It's written in picture language, as I said. So, what's the permanent message of Revelation? Well, faith triumphs over antagonistic forces. God is victorious over evil and Satan. That's the main message. And it's the inevitability of judgment. In other words, God is going to judge the world and bring punishment to hell. In other words, he's the God of justice. Today we see evil capitalists making millions out of ordinary workers. We see corrupt regimes, we see dictatorships, we see people that are evil get away with things. But really in Revelation, what's revealed is the true nature of justice, what's actually going to happen, that people don't get away with things. There is a judgment and there is justice, and God is righteous. That's an important thing. When people suffer, it isn't for no reason. There will be an accountability. And God is calling us to be faithful unto death, as it says in Revelation, in times of suffering. So suffering is inevitable. It's going to happen. God is supreme. He is God. He is totally God, despite the fact that in this world we see that the brutal regimes seem to be in charge, and the devil seems to be very much working in mankind, but he's limited in what he can do by God. There are demons, there's evil at work, and we can see that, corruption, and everywhere we look, we find dishonesty, we find brutality, we find things are not working well, people are destroying their environment, there's pollution everywhere. So this book is written to give us hope. God is supreme. And fifthly, Jesus is coming back to bring judgment to the end of the world. So this is an end time, end of the world prophecy. Many people today are forgetting this fact, many Christians, that Jesus is coming back. And this gives us hope that he's going to bring judgment and justice, as I said, into the world. And it also gives us hope and a motive for living a righteous, holy life. Because if Jesus is coming back, he's going to judge us, and on the basis of the way we've lived, he's going to give us rewards. If we've lived faithfully, he'll give us a big reward. We're not judged in the sense of sent to hell, but if our name is written in the book of life, we're given rewards for the way that we've lived, of our works, of the way that we've been faithful. So 5 good reasons why Revelation was written. There are various schools of interpretation. This is the most controversial book in the New Testament. Lots of books have been written about it. I'm just going to give you 4 schools of interpretation. The first one has a strange name. It's called preterist. In other words, everything was already fulfilled in the 1st century under the Roman Empire at the time of writing. So it was relevant for the people reading it in the first century. It was meaningful because they were under persecution. And Rome is Babylon, and Rome fell in AD 70. It seems a bit difficult if we have a late date for the writing of Revelation because Rome had already fallen. But in a sense, a lot of what is written in Revelation was already fulfilled in the 1st century, but these are foreshadowings, or in other words, telling us what might happen in the future. There, for example, we could see antichrists in Roman emperors, but they're only sort of examples of the Antichrist and a future Antichrist that would come later. The drawback of this preterist viewpoint is that nothing is relevant for us today because it was already fulfilled. They believe that we're in the millennium and the devil is defeated. This is difficult to see as they want to interpret that now we're establishing the kingdom now, because the drawback is that it's obvious that the devil is very much in power in our world today. Um, it's a triumphalist view that we'll conquer the world, we'll take over educational systems, we'll take over um, all the political power, will establish the church totally. The Bible doesn't really teach that at all. But that's the preterist view, and there's something to be said for it. The historicist view, or the fact that we're seeing throughout history, the whole of the church age is seeing things play out. The 7 types of churches, or 7 periods. The coming of the beast is the papacy. The Antichrist was the Pope. The difficulty is making Western history fit into all these prophecies, and nobody agrees about the interpretation. It's a very much anti-Catholic view, and it was espoused by the reformists, Luther and Calvin. There's lots of disagreement about the interpretation of each prophecy. The third view is called Futurist, and that's to say everything in Revelation is just for after the first 3 chapters, which is interpreted within the context in which it was written. Everything is written for the last few years just before the second coming of Christ, immediately before. So the book concerns the 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation, and the church won't even go through the tribulation. It'll be taken out. It's a very literal view of Revelation, and the book basically, if that's true, has no relevance for us today unless we're in the last days, and that's a controversial belief. Some believe that, others don't. Anyway, if it was just written for the last few years before the second coming, then it had no relevance for the first century Christians, which seems strange. It's mainly concerned with the tribulation. A fourth view, which has been propounded, is called the idealist view, or spiritual view, or the sort of symbolic view that nothing can be taken literally. It wasn't historical. It doesn't relate to historical events. Everything is just based on ideas and principles of the struggle between good and evil. There's no time reference in Revelation. Everything in Revelation is applicable to all of us, and that's how God works in human history in a sort of general way. Everything is very poetic. Nobody can understand the symbols. They're all spiritual. The millennium isn't literal. It's just symbolic of eternity, or the present reign between the first and second coming. The drawback of it is that it doesn't seem to fit with the fact that the second coming isn't mentioned really, isn't emphasized, and that obviously John was referring to real events and real judgment and a real hell. If there's anything that the devil wants to get rid of, is the fact that he exists and that there's a hell and judgment. So if we say in a very airy, poetic way, oh well, Revelation is just talking about a generalized struggle between evil and good, the devil's really happy, because the book of Revelation shows above all that there's going to be judgment, there's going to be punishment for the devil and his angels and for those that refuse the gospel. So that's the idealist view. Just summarizing, we can take a little bit out of each one of these views. Maybe we can be what some people call eclectic. That means we just take a little bit and take what we can learn from each of these views. So that's the first part, in which I've looked at the purpose of writing Revelation, some of the interpretations of Revelation, what it was for, and the type of literature. It's apocalyptic. It's similar to the writings in the book of Daniel and in Zechariah, in the book of Ezekiel, and of course in the Olivet Discourse, a lot of that is end time literature. And so we have to understand it that way, not try and understand it like a narrative in the sense of Jesus in the Gospels healing people. So it's a completely different type of book. And I do urge you to read it and ask the Lord to give you understanding as you read the book of Revelation. So parts 2, 3 and 4 will be in future videos.